This is the World Today Weekend on CKNW News Talk 980. Once again, here's Sean Leslie.
All right, we heard earlier in the program from New Democrat MP Peter Julian. He was very critical of the Conservative government's treatment of Canadian veterans on this day before Remembrance Day. Mr. Julian saying the government wasted money on things like commemorating the War of 1812 or hosting the G20 summit while neglecting injured veterans, some of whom are suing the government over their benefits for injuries suffered while in service. Joined now by James Morby, Canada's Minister of Heritage and the Conservative MP for Port Moody, Westwood, Port Coquitlam. James Moore, good afternoon.
Pleasure as always.
How would you respond to Mr. Julian's criticisms?
Well, I heard the interview, and it was frankly enough to make a cat laugh. I heard his criticisms about what our government is in the process of doing. And it was really quite astonishing that a member of Parliament can actually get away with saying those kinds of things publicly. First, he criticizes our government for our spending on the War of 1812. Need I remind him that NDP members of Parliament got up in Parliament in past years and demanded that we spend more on the War of 1812 and its commemoration. And in fact, I have letters on my desk from NDP members of Parliament from Welland and Hamilton who are critical of our government for not spending enough on the War
Really?
of 1812.
There were New Democrats who wanted money spent to commemorate the War of 1812.
Absolutely. If you're from Welland and Hamilton and Southwest Ontario, this is a very big deal. As a matter of fact, it was just, I think, a week and a half ago was the anniversary of the Battle of Queenston Heights, and there were 25,000 people who were out and publicly watching a reenactment of that battle. It's a very big deal. And in the investment that we have in the War of 1812, all of it comes from existing funds. It's the same funds, by the way, that we tapped into for community celebrations and commemorations that we used for the Vancouver 2010 Olympics. It's what we're using for Canada's 150th birthday. It's what we've used in the past for commemorations and large events. And so NDP members of Parliament in one part of the country criticize us for not spending enough, and then Peter Julian comes out here and criticizes us on the other end. He also, it must be said, in the same breath, said that our government is not doing enough for veterans, while at the same then criticizes us for our program to support veterans who are in financial difficulty with the cost of their burials and funerals, forgetting the part in the middle where it was our government that actually created that program. So much for the argument that we're not doing anything. So, it was laughable listening to this New Democrat actually trying to articulate a position when it was so full of holes. He
says 20,000 veterans, though, have been denied burial, that there's more negatives than acceptances under that program.
Let me explain the program and how it arrived at where we are and what's going on in the future. Because I was part of the discussions when this program was created. A couple of years ago, we were approached with actually a very sad story, and a story that should never happen in a country as wealthy as ours and with the veterans that we have, where there was a veteran from the Second World War who was impoverished, and his family couldn't afford to, frankly, have a proper burial and a funeral for him. And we were made aware of the story, and we said, well, this is something that should never happen. That they should never have a veteran who, because of financial circumstances, isn't provided the dignity of a proper funeral and a burial. So we created a program. We created a new program that funds two things: the burial and or a funeral. And on average, it's $7,000 to $9,000 cost that is awarded to those families who apply for this fund. And it was, again, it's means tested. It wasn't for all veterans. It was for veterans who are particularly impoverished, because that's who the Veterans Ombudsman singled out as a particular sore spot. Well, when we created the program, we set aside funds and we created this program. And at the time, it was widely hailed as this is a sign of compassion for veterans who are not financially well off or can't afford a funeral. But of course, many people far beyond what we expected applied for the program, and then we had people who were getting rejected. So certainly going forward, if that's something that we ought to address, we're certainly open to that, to doing so. But the idea that we've done nothing, we created this very program out of compassion for veterans who are financially not well off, to ensure that they are provided a dignity in their passing. So we've created this exact program, and it has benefited over 10,000 veterans so far. And certainly we're going to continue to make investments. And, with regard to spending across the government of Canada, we've made some cuts in a lot of places, but for services to veterans, for payouts to veterans, we've increased funding by over $2 billion. And as a matter of fact, out of all the things which our government has increased spending on, support for veterans is proportionally by far the largest area of increased funding support that our government has invested in since we were elected in 2006.
Interesting. He was also concerned about this George Derby Center Veterans Hospital in Burnaby being devolved to provincial control and now looking at contracting out some of their services there. He says the feds have tossed off the responsibility for these facilities to provincial governments, and that could result in worse service for the veterans there. I know this probably isn't actually your area of responsibility, James Moore, but do you have any thoughts on that?
It's better that way. Certainly some circumstances may come up where there are some differences from the past that could be improved upon, but the reality is hospitals being dealt with and managed and financed closer to home, closer to the ground to communities is better than having them managed and operated out of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which, by the way, is based out of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island. We think it's better this way, and it has had good results. So he says the government pulled funding out of it is frankly just a lie. We have funded. I've been part of events, and we've funding events and announcements at the George Derby Center itself where we announced new funding and expansion there. So it's just simply not true. And so he just comes on the radio and it's just nonsense. It's just not true. And the frontline delivery of health services is provincial, not federal responsibility. And frankly, more often than not, 9 times out of 10, it's better that way because it's more responsive, it's on the ground, it's in the communities dealing with the veterans where they serve rather than dealing with the federal government that is very far away in physical distance and sometimes in appreciation of what the needs are on the ground.
So he sounds like, James, where you think your government's being unfairly criticized for its handling of veterans.
No, I think what often happens is, if memory serves, there are about 260 or so thousand Canadians who have some kind of a relationship with Veterans Affairs. Either they have a family member who's currently serving, has served in the past, they're currently getting benefits from Veterans Affairs, and always it's an ongoing system of trial and error. And there are obviously mistakes in the bureaucracy. There are efforts in policy that can be done better, and there's always room for improvement. We always do our best. But if you look at everything that we've done from when we were first elected in 2006, we're very proud of the record. And part of it, by the way, is the fact that the Conservative Party, we have cabinet ministers who were lifelong members of the Canadian Armed Forces. Our chief government whip, a member of the leadership team in our party, Gordon O'Connor, was a 35-year member of the Canadian Forces, who rose to the rank of Brigadier General. Laurie Hahn, who's a parliamentary secretary, he's the parliamentary secretary to the defense minister, so the number 2 behind the defense minister. He served in the Canadian Forces for over 30 years. We have members who understand in a very personal way what the needs and frustrations have been with Veterans Affairs, and we do our best to address them. But when you have so many people who have so many different dynamics in which they've served in the Canadian Forces, be it the Second World War, Korea, or all the way up to Kandahar today, there are all kinds of different dynamics that require a lot of flexibility, and sometimes it's not there, and that's something that obviously always needs to be improved upon. Remembrance
Day tomorrow. We have about a minute left. James Moore, what are your thoughts, and what would you like people to think about as we commemorate our military veterans?
Well, Peter Julian and I will debate. We have been for a very long time. We will in the future, and that's fine. But I think that it's certainly a moment every year, and it ought not be just this moment of the year, where we do stop and we realize that the men and women of the Canadian Forces, they are the bravest and the best. And I'm going to have a proud moment. I'm going to be out in Fort Langley, not in my riding this year, but I'm going to be out in Fort Langley with my father, myself, and my son, who was just born a little over a week ago. So,
congratulations. Didn't know that.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I generally keep actually contradicting myself, I generally keep my private life private, but you asked it. But my great-grandfather, James Joseph Moore, is buried there. He served in the First World War, so it'll be a nice family moment. And, the men and women of the Canadian Forces today and in the past are the bravest and the best, and they deserve dignity and respect. And as a government, we always do our best. I can assure you we do our best to try to ensure that programs are there to deliver meaningful service and help for those men and women of the Canadian Forces, because they've earned it head and shoulders above any other member of our society. And tomorrow's a day where we all get to say thanks and hear their stories and have a moment of silence for them.
James Moore, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Canada's Minister of Heritage, the Conservative MP for Port Moody, Westwood, Port Coquitlam. We'll take a quick break here on CKNW News Talk 980.